Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being with us today. It's a confusing topic that we're going to cover today. What are your rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act when it comes to face masks and face coverings? And as we all know, the situation with the COVID pandemic is changing all the time. So I'm going to try to share with you the most recent information that I've been able to find, but just know that things keep changing and it's all very, very confusing. There really are not any easy answers to the questions that I'm sure you're going to have for us. We'll take those questions and I'll do the best that I can trying to guess at what the answers would be. But just keep in mind that things are constantly on the move with this epidemic. What I'd like to do today is, first of all, I'll introduce myself to you. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the face mask requirements to give you a little bit of a context for thinking about it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the Americans with Disabilities Act requires. And then we'll end by giving you some advice on advocacy skills that you can use as you are encountering different businesses and different rules. I'll try to take a break every once in a while to see if you have any questions. I'll have to turn to Cheryl when we get to that point because I'm not very good at managing both Zoom and the chat box. But feel free to use the chat box, and when I take a break, you can also just use the Q&A function. Okay, Cheryl, next. Let me tell you, first of all, a little bit about the Disability Law Center of Virginia. We are a statewide advocacy organization that represents people with all sorts of disabilities. From developmental disabilities to mental health diagnoses to communications and mobility disabilities. If you have a disability, we are able to assist in some way with any kind of legal rights violation. It's our mission to promote independence and choice and self-determination for people with disabilities. We are charged with investigating and recommending changes to things that would present abuse or neglect to people with disabilities, and to promote policies and interpretations of laws that would advance the legal rights of all people with disabilities. As you know, there's somewhere around 1 million people with disabilities in Virginia, and there's 36 staff at the Disability Law Center of Virginia. So although our goal is to work on behalf of all people with disabilities in Virginia, we clearly have to do it in thoughtful and strategic ways and cannot represent every single issue or every single person who contacts us. But we do try to do strategic work that will benefit as many people as possible. Next. So let's just talk a little bit about the COVID-19 situation that we are in. As you all know, in March of 2020, the World Health Organization declared a world pandemic of the COVID-19 virus, meaning that it had reached epidemic levels in most countries at that point. And in response to that epidemic, states were trying to do a number of different things, and a lot of confusing orders came out. You may remember in the very beginning that some states said, don't wear a mask. And the reason why they were saying that was because there was such a shortage of face masks everywhere in the country that medical personnel were not able to access face masks. Eventually, many states started adopting what was known as a face mask order or a face mask requirement. And in Virginia, in May of 2020, Governor Northam announced a couple of different face masks orders. The final one that we're operating under right now came at the end of May. The governor's face mask orders made it a misdemeanor, a class 1 misdemeanor, to willfully violate the face mask requirement. And in the governor's announcements about this, he made it pretty clear that he was talking about the businesses having the responsibility to enforce this. That if a business violates the face mask order, it could be a fine for that business of $2,500. It could be a jail sentence, up to 12 months in jail. And he also made it clear in that order that he was going to seek enforcement through the State Corporations Commission and through local health departments. And what that meant is that a business could lose their license, could lose their ability to continue to serve people if they did not enforce the mask order. The governor expressly, especially in further press conferences, urged businesses to refuse service to people who did not wear a mask. And he did that as recently as the middle of July. But he also said that he was hoping businesses and individuals would simply comply with the order and that we would not have to rely on these enforcement mechanisms. And as we know from news stories, we're seeing some compliance, we're seeing some people who are defying the orders, but I don't think we've seen a lot of enforcement by local police up to this point. So next slide. So let's back up a little bit and think about the governor's orders that happened in May. The governor's mask order applied to all public settings, from restaurants to hospitals to bars and office spaces. It went into effect on May 29th. There had been a couple of orders prior to that, and the May 29th order really sought to clarify all of those rules. And although we call it a mask requirement, it's actually a face covering requirement. So it's a something that has to cover the nose and mouth. It could be a mask, it could be a scarf, it could be a bandana. The governor's order doesn't say this as an example, but we believe that a face covering of a shield, a clear plastic face shield, would also meet the requirements of the governor's order. Now, a couple of things that are really interesting about the governor's order are in the May 29th order, the governor expressly says that the face mask requirement does not apply to people who are communicating with somebody who relies on lip reading. And it says this in the governor's order, that if you are trying to communicate with somebody who uses lip reading as their main means of communication or as a supplement to their means of communication, that you do not have to wear a mask or wear a face covering. And the governor's order also expressly exempts anybody with a health condition that would make wearing a mask difficult. So those things are both in the May 29th order, but if you have seen press releases or press coverage of the governor's order, those things are almost never mentioned. So the governor speaks about this order as though it is all-inclusive, but the express language of the order does have these exceptions in it. Next slide. So the bottom line, next to the question is, can a public accommodation or a government office require face masks? Next. And the answer is yes. There have actually been quite a few court cases in other states challenging whether the state's face mask orders are legal and are they constitutional. And in a couple of states, there have been some decisions that have said that they were not developed the right way, that the mask orders might be legitimate, but that they should have gone through the legislature or should have gone through a regulatory process. But for the most part, all of the cases are saying that face mask requirements are legal and justifiable in this emergency. Next slide. And so the next question we ask is, as somebody with a disability, can you just simply refuse to wear a face mask and still enter the business or the office, still enter the government building? And the short answer is no. And we'll get into that in some detail. So before we move to the next slide, Cheryl, let's see if there's any questions. Looks like there's something in the chat box and something in the Q&A box.
Yes, in the chat, it says, thank you for presenting this important topic, especially because of the fake ADA mask exemption cards and people representing freedom to breathe, not a legitimate organization making the cards.
So, and that came from Amy. So thank you very much, Amy, for that. We all know that some of the difficulty of enforcing the Americans with Disabilities Act on a whole bunch of different fronts, from service animals to other issues, are people who are claiming to have a disability, but they don't have one. And this quickly overtook the issues that we were trying to raise around the mask requirements and trying to make sure that the governor and other states knew that there are disability issues involved in this. But as Amy points out, there are a lot of people who have these fake mask exemption cards or are claiming to have disabilities when they don't really have a disability. Many people do not like wearing face masks, and that's very understandable, but as a friend of mine says, if you don't like wearing a face mask, you are going to hate having a ventilator. All right,
Okay,
and is there something in the Q&A?
Yeah, the next one is, I'm not sure this is accurate, but she says she saw a news feed that Norfolk is hiring 100 people to enforce the COVID rules.
So I think that that's a possibility, and the way that the rules are being enforced is generally through the licenses from the local health departments. So, you know, restaurants have to get a license from their local health department to operate, and they have to go through inspections. So it is possible that some local health departments are hiring additional people to help with that effort, to do the inspections. The Tidewater area, the Virginia Beach area in particular, has had a higher infection rate, a higher positivity rate than other parts of the state. And I could imagine Norfolk, Tidewater agencies wanting to get ahead of that and hiring people to help with the enforcement and the education of that. I don't know, Cheryl, if are you aware of the answer to that question?
Actually, not specifically for the COVID enforcement, but I'm on the local emergency planning committee, and I just reviewed their action plan that's for this week yesterday, and it said that what they do is they educate first and then they cite. And
Right.
But whether it is the police or if it is other people, that I don't know, but I'll see what I can find out and let people know.
Another thing that the state is doing in hiring around the response to COVID, and this could be what Norfolk is talking about with hiring that many people, is hiring what's called contact tracers. And those are people that try to figure out who all an infected person had contact with in the 72 hours prior to the diagnosis, so that those people can be alerted that they too might need to have a test and make sure that they did not have the infection. So I know that the state's doing a lot of hiring of contact tracers, and other states are hiring them as well. And the Centers for Disease Control is hiring some. So it's possible that that's where those additional 100 people are being hired.
Yeah, I'll reach out while we're on our webinar. But something else, the Virginia Department of Health just did a web app, COVID-wise, I think it's called. I don't know if that's in your presentation or not.
No, no.
But that's
But
where you report if you're positive so that they can try to help determine who around you may be positive. So, okay, that's all we have in the queue.
we're finding nationwide that the contact tracing is very, very difficult, that people are very resistant to revealing the names of people that they've been in contact with. I think some people feel like they might be telling on someone. So if you had contact with a friend who was positive and wasn't quarantining, you feel like you're ratting on them or you're tattletale by doing that. So there's a lot of people who are very resistant to that. And I think that that's part of why why states are exploring things like this Google app, where you can do some of the communications a little more anonymously. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide then. And so just to kind of back it up and so that everybody remembers what the Americans with Disabilities Act covers, it is a federal law, and it covers government, state and local government organizations, and it covers what are called public accommodations. These entities are all required to make reasonable modifications to the policies. And so just hang here for a second. So under Title II and Title III, there are different requirements about reasonable modifications to the policies or reasonable accommodations, which can include policy changes. And these are requirements that are part of the regulations under both Title II and Title III. But those say modifications to the policies. They do not say that an entity has to waive the policy. They do not say that the entity has to remove that policy. That's one of the things that could be discussed, removing the policy. It's one of the things that could be negotiated, but it's not a requirement to waive the policy. Okay, next slide. So some of the examples of reasonable policy modifications could be that if you can't wear a mask and you want to go into a restaurant and they won't let you into the restaurant, that restaurant could offer to provide curbside service that you could order using your telephone, or you could, if they come out to the car, you can make the order and do curbside. So that could be a reasonable modification. An online ordering service is considered to be a reasonable modification if you are seeking to buy something at your local knick-knack shop, or need to go to the grocery store. If you're able to order it online and go pick it up, have them bring it to your car, that's considered a reasonable modification of the face mask. Certainly home delivery. If an organization or a business is willing to bring something to your front porch, bring something to your front door, and deliver it there, that would be a reasonable modification of the face mask requirement. And then there are some businesses who are offering limited entry into the grocery store, into the business when nobody else is in there. And you don't have to wear the mask as long as you keep socially distant from other people there. There's not a lot of those anymore that are offering that, but there is that possibility of a modification to the rule that way. Okay, all right, next slide. So if the Americans with Disabilities Act requires a modification and your business says no, how can they do that? How can they say no? How can they require you to wear a mask when, when the Americans with Disabilities Act requires a modification? And there's a couple of reasons in the ADA that allow a business to refuse to make a modification. The one that applies in this situation, for the most part, is the exception that's called the direct threat. And so the Americans with Disabilities Act says that no business, no entity is required to make a modification that would pose a significant risk to the health and safety of others. So in a lot of these situations, that is what the business is saying, that to provide an exception for you, for anybody, to go into the business without a mask would pose a direct threat to their employees, would pose a direct threat to their other customers. There's a couple of other exceptions in the Americans with Disabilities Act that also would apply in this situation. And one of them is the undue burden exception. Now, I find this one an interesting one because businesses have changed their means of operation so much in ways that a year ago we would have said would be an undue burden, and nonetheless they've found ways to do it. But basically what the Americans with Disabilities Act says is that a business is not required to take on a significant financial or administrative burden in order to modify a policy. So in the previous slide where I said, you know, one of the things that businesses are offering is limited hours where people who can't wear masks might come in. That's a great thing for a business to be able to offer, but you can't require it of a business as a policy modification. If that business decides that opening an hour early just for people who can't wear masks is an undue burden, that they don't have enough staff for something like that, then the ADA would not require it. And then the other exception that is in the Americans with Disabilities Act is the fundamental alteration exception. And basically it says that you can't request a modification of a policy that would change the nature of the business. And again, this is another one that's very interesting in the times of this crisis, because many places would not offer consultations using video conferences. Many places would not allow telemedicine. They all would consider that to be a fundamental alteration, you know, 10 months ago. But now all of a sudden businesses are finding a lot of different ways to do things. So it's particularly harder to argue that anything would be a fundamental alteration when so many businesses have changed the way of doing things. So that's why I say that the most serious response to this is the direct threat. And it's pretty clear that, that state governments, that businesses believe that somebody coming into their business without wearing a mask could be a direct threat to their employees and to their staff, or to their customers. So before we go to the next slide, can we just see if there's any questions or anything in the chat box?
Nothing has come in.
Nothing has come in. Do we have any questions up to this point from anyone?
Nope. No question, no chat. Oh, I have one now. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, it's a lengthy one. Okay.
Okay. Took a while to type it.
Okay. I went to a doctor's appointment recently. There is a large outside lobby before you enter the large medical practice. A lady walked into the lobby without a mask and went into the doctor's office and was escorted out by a nurse because she had no mask. She kept screaming her ADA rights were violated. Finally, a doctor came out and explained that he could escort her into a private room, but she could not sit in the lobby, even if she was distanced there. He also offered a shield mask that was not as restrictive, maybe, than the mask she had been offered. She left saying medical practices cannot do this.
So that's a great example. So there's so much in that example. It's really wonderful. So this was an example where the doctor's office was trying to comply with the state law about wearing masks. And they were doing the self-enforcement procedure of having the person without a mask being escorted out. And when that didn't work very effectively, they offered accommodations. They offered a modification to their policy. They said, we can bring you in a back door to a private room, but you can't come through the lobby, and you can't stay in the lobby even if you stay distanced from people. And you know, in this example that Rena's telling us about, the woman is screaming. And so when you're screaming, you are absolutely projecting moisture and spit and stuff everywhere. So the doctor's office is exactly right that this person should not be allowed to stay in the lobby screaming. Offering a face shield instead of a mask is a great alternative. It's a great modification of the policy. And this person clearly did not want to comply with any of these offers that were made. So the doctor's office was doing exactly what was required by both the Americans with Disabilities Act and the state law around this, the state governor's order, and made the right choice to refuse to serve this person. So the person says medical practices cannot do this, and yes, medical practices can do that and are actually required to do that. Now, just so you know, Rena, I'm assuming that everything is exactly accurate the way that you told that story. And often in this kind of a situation, there are nuances that we don't know about. So there could be some things that, you know, there could be like the woman was refused service by that medical practice for other reasons prior, and she felt like that's what was, so just kind of trying to be cautious here that I'm answering the hypothetical that you presented, and if you throw in some different facts, the answer might be a little bit different. So Cheryl, did you have something that you wanted to add to that story?
No, I think, like you said, that the practice did everything that they could. Now, it is possible, like you suggested, that maybe this person didn't follow other guidance, or maybe their bill was behind. I don't know. You know, I know the practice that I go to, I had wanted to add my husband to the practice, but they weren't taking it anymore. So I have to find someplace else. You know, so there's various reasons why things happen, you know, and if you don't like the answer, you know, I guess you start screaming, but
right. Right.
But like you said, I think the ADA, you know, she doesn't have a leg to stand on as far as being a formal complaint.
Right.
We do have another question. There is a store at the end of my street and had an employee that was COVID positive. They're refusing to close and disinfect their store. I have reported them to the CDC. Can they refuse to disinfect their store?
So that's a great question. And it's a little bit outside of what we're talking about today. But I will say that the governor has issued guidelines for the protection of employees in businesses. And so my guess would be that that practice of refusing to close the business, refusing to disinfect, is probably a violation of the governor's rules relating to safe work environments. But I am not as familiar with those rules, so I'm not positive about that. Is there a way to go back to that question? Because there was something else. Oh wait, I've got it. I think I've got it now. There was something else that I wanted to look at in that question.
Can you see it?
Oh, yes, I've got it now. So the other thing I want to tell you is, Barbara, you reported them to the Centers for Disease Control, and the CDC doesn't actually have any kind of enforcement authority. So I think that if this is an ongoing problem and you want to report them to somebody, I would report them to your local Department of Health. Because the local Department of Health can do things like pull a person's license, pull a business's license. And then Cheryl, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, there's a complaint thing in the last order that came out, but I don't think it's the CDC. I will see if I can find it and I will put it in the chat. There's an actual complaint number or a website to go to.
Excellent.
Okay. We have a couple more questions.
Sure.
All right. This one is from Nicole. She says, I saw a Facebook video about a mother who had a child with a disability who had sensitivity issues that caused for the child to be unable to wear a mask. The family booked an airline trip, and when it came time to prepare, they were informed that it was up to the person checking them in to see if they would allow the child to fly without a mask. With situations like this, do the policies need to be universal, or can it be left up to the employees checking them in?
So that's a really marvelous example, because in this situation where the airline says it's up to the person at the person checking them in, the person at the desk, to make that determination, that's actually what the Americans with Disabilities Act requires, is an individualized assessment, making a determination based on what the actual situation is, how many people are on that flight, what the child's disability is, but the consequence, the risk is you've booked this trip, and if you happen to have a flight attendant behind the desk who is really strict and really scared about COVID, they might say no, absolutely not. Where somebody who maybe is feeling a little bit more confident and a little less terrified of everything might say, sure, come on, get on. And so the ADA requires it to be an individualized determination, an individualized assessment of whether there's a direct threat, but that does leave it open to the consequences of getting all the way to the check-in desk and not being able to get on the plane.
Okay.
So let's move on to the next slide, and we'll come back and do some
Okay. Well, the other
answers.
one was just an okay, thank you. So.
Okay. Good.
So I will go now to your slide. Let me mute myself, and I'll see what I can find about the other things we talked.
Okay. Okay. So here's some tips for you as we're going forward on this. First of all, always keep in mind that the situation changes all the time. The Department of Justice issued an opinion letter about whether people with disabilities are entitled to an exemption from the mask requirement, and the Department of Justice said no, that there's not an automatic entitlement to an exemption from the mask requirement. But opinions like that change. And if there's case law that happens about the face mask requirement, there might be a new opinion. So do try to stay on top of what the rules are. Try to stay on top of what the executive orders in Virginia are as best as you can. The situation does change. But if you cannot wear a mask and you want to go into a restaurant, you want to go into a store, you want to go to a professional office, the best thing to do is to first have a conversation with the owner of the business, the manager of that business. Explain your situation. If you just show up and insist that you can go in without a mask, I can almost promise you the answer will be no. So it's much better to try to have that conversation before you even try to participate in the business. By phone call, by email, sometimes setting up a video chat so that the owner can see why it is you cannot wear a mask. Ask the business about whether there's any other ways in which you can get the benefits of their business. And suggest some of the things that we talked about in this, or maybe between the two of you, you will come up with some other ideas. Ask whether you could come in 15 minutes before the business opens. Ask whether they can bring something to your car. Ask whether they're willing to walk through the store with a camera on their phone and show things to you that you could then pick out. Just because you suggest it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll say yes, but it's going to be a much less hostile situation if you have that conversation before you try to come in and try to come up with ideas that will meet your needs and the needs of the business at the same time. Consider whether there's something other than a face mask that you could wear that would enable you to go in. And we have in our office, we have the face shields, which come well down below the chin, wrap all the way around the face, And most places, I think, would consider that to be an adequate face covering. So if that's something, it typically is not going to interfere with your ability to breathe. And if that's the reason why you can't wear a mask, see whether a face shield will help. Sometimes just a loosely tied scarf that's sort of tied over the bridge of your nose and just hangs loosely, that might also work for you without restricting your ability to breathe. I think really the most important thing that you can do, though, is to talk to other people about the impact that wearing a face mask has on your life. In our office, when we instituted the face mask rule, a couple of my staff who have hearing impairments just kind of like shrugged their shoulders and said, you know, okay, well, apparently I'm not going to be able to understand anybody for the next 6 months of my life. Where if they had come to me directly and said, don't forget, I rely on lip reading, I could have changed that policy in the office a lot faster. I could have made it really clear that there are other ways to accommodate somebody who relies on lip reading. So it's really, I think it's an opportunity for everybody with a disability who is struggling with the face mask rule to talk about why it is a difficult thing. I think you can assume that most people are trying to comply with the face mask rule out of the best of intentions and just don't think sometimes about the impact that it's going to have on people with disabilities. So take this opportunity to be an advocate, to talk about what the impact is on your life or on your friend's life or on other people with disabilities, and see if people can start to think about other ways to accommodate people. Okay, next slide. Cheryl was looking some stuff up for us. So I think the next slide, yeah, just asks whether you have any questions. And to let you know that the Disability Law Center of Virginia is available for information and referral to anybody who calls us. If you call on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you will get the opportunity to speak to a live advocate who can help you sort through what the rules are. You can also email us a request, or if you get onto our website, which is at the bottom of this slide in really, really tiny print, dlcv.org, we do have an online service request portal. So 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, you can get on that portal and request our assistance with something if you need to. We also always have a need for volunteers to help us, and especially to help spread the word about things in this crisis. It's a very challenging time to educate people, and we are hoping that more and more people will step up and be advocates. All right, Cheryl, any more questions? Let's open it up to questions or comments.
I don't see anything at this point, but I did check with the city of Norfolk, the Emergency Operations Center, and they don't know anything about the 100 people being hired as enforcers, but he suggested I talk to Virginia Department of Health, and I have a call with them this afternoon, a vulnerable populations call. So as I find out more, I can make that available on our next webinar. Whatever I find out. I'm still trying to find that link, and once I find out, I can send that out as well.
Excellent.
I do have another question. She said, this is very informative. I heard people say that people with disabilities are waived from having to wear a mask in buildings if it would cause them difficulty with breathing. Is it that the federal ADA law regarding public threat supersedes the governor's law?
Yeah, so this is really a prime example of what I consider to be some of the most confusing aspects of these requirements, because the governor's order is what controls here. The governor's order says masks in public places, in all public places, or face coverings in all public places. But the governor's order also expressly says that there are exemptions for people who have difficulty breathing, or for whom this would be a challenge. Um, the responsibility for complying with the governor's order is with the individual business. And I think that if an individual business says you cannot come in, regardless of whether you have difficulty breathing, you can't come in without a mask. I think that that's going to be the safest bet for that business going forward, rather than creating an exemption for you. Because if they let somebody in who claims to have difficulty breathing and it turns out to not be true, then that business could be fined $2,500. The owner of the business could go to jail for up to a year. So with the risk of not requiring a mask being so high, I think that most businesses are going to lean on the side of requiring a mask, even if somebody says their disability makes it hard. But this is all very, very confusing. It's all changing all the time, and there's no really easy answers to any of this. So Ventoria,
Okay.
my basic message would be, do not assume that you can enter a business without a mask, even if the mask causes difficulty breathing. And if you are somebody, or you or your friends or somebody has difficulty wearing a mask for that reason, have a conversation with the business you want to go into first.
Okay, we don't have any other comments. As a person who with a hearing loss, and I utilize lip reading, so it has become very difficult for me with the masks. And
Yes.
I do have some that have a panel open for the mouth. That's great for me, but doesn't help me on the other end reading somebody else. So what I have encountered, like when I go to the clinic to get my prescriptions, what I do is they have these series of questions and they'll start rattling it off and I'll say, I can't understand you. Can I just read the questions? Or if I step back, can you move your mask so that you can not say them? You know, most of the time they just hand me the questions. So I do try to, you know, be cognizant of the fact that people need the distance and to try to accommodate my needs so that I understand what's being said. So.
Right. The practice that we use in my office is, if you're communicating with somebody who uses lip reading, to step back, make sure there's at least 6 feet between you and the person who uses the lip reading as a communication skill, and then you can drop your masks. But the problem with that is, if you are in a hallway in our office building and that happens, other people may try to pass. And so you've got to also be very aware of the fact that there's other people in the hallway, there's other people nearby, and you have to maintain that 6 feet of distance from everybody.
Yeah. I also saw that with the clinic, because they have these doors that open up and they have people coming in and people going out. And I try to wait until the person does, but then I had somebody just went walking right past me, didn't even think, just said, I got to get out of here. And, you know,
Right.
so yeah, it is hard to try to keep the distance even when you're trying to practice it. So,
we also offer our guests, our visitors in the office, we offer them face masks or face shields. And so if they are meeting with a staff person who relies on lip reading, our recommendation would be that they use the face shield. And you know, those shields are not perfect, but there's a slightly better chance of being able to read lips through the face shield than there would be with face mask.
right. Yeah, we just got some face shields here.
They're surprisingly not very expensive. I think we got a dozen for $10. It was not as much as I thought it was going to be.
So you just do you dispose of them afterwards, or do they just take them with them?
They can take them with them, right?
Okay.
And like I have one, and I will just wear it multiple times, and I'll wipe off the inside after I use it with a disinfectant wipe. But if we give it to somebody who is a guest to our office, they can just take it, and they can dispose of it if they want to, or they can reuse it.
Okay. We have something else in the Q&A.
Okay.
This is from Amy. I have read news articles of people on the autism spectrum not wearing masks because of the parents and caregivers of said folk on the autism spectrum not liking the sensory issues with it, such as
Right.
not comfortable and irritable. As an autistic person, a person on the autism spectrum myself, I always wear one whenever I go out. My question is, would it be legitimate if a parent, caregiver, or the person on the autism spectrum, him or herself, to not wear a mask because of the sensory issues claimed?
So a great question, Amy. And I think if I understand it correctly, you're saying that the parent or the caregiver doesn't have the disability, but they are a caregiver for somebody on the autism spectrum who might be particularly sensitive to the sight of somebody with a mask, or be troubled by not being able to see the facial emotions. Um, so as we know, there's probably as many different manifestations of autism as there are people with autism. Everybody has their own responses to sensory issues and to input from the outside. Um, this is why under the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's got to be a very individualized determination. But if you are a caregiver for somebody with autism who does not like to see the mask, does not like to have a mask on somebody that they are interacting with, it might be completely legitimate not to wear a mask. It's also legitimate for a business not to allow you to come in without that mask. So absolutely, it's an individualized decision that you have to make. But right now, under the law, it appears that a business can refuse to serve you if you're not wearing a mask.
Okay, we don't have any other questions at this time. I'm going to go to our closing slide. We do
Okay.
have something else. All right, part 2 from Amy. Okay, we only have a couple of minutes.
Can
If the
they
person on
sue?
autism
Right.
spectrum, parent or caregiver, rejects the idea of even wearing a face shield, scarf, or a bandana, could they sue the business for turning them away?
So the answer to the question, can they sue? Of course they can sue, but will they win? I don't believe they will win. I think that the deference is going to be on behalf of businesses that are trying to enforce the face mask orders. There have not been a lot of cases like that yet, and I might turn out to be wrong about that, but I don't believe that a business is going to be held liable for enforcing the face mask order, even as against a person with a disability.
Okay. Thank you, Colleen.
Sure.
Very informative. We had a lot of great questions and really
Yes.
good answers. Good examples. So we thank you for your time today.